The KrakenD is actually the title of my talk. So it's not about octopuses at all. If you expected something like that, you're going to be disappointed. So KrakenD is a product, is an API gateway product that I've had some experience with last year, and I like it so much that I wanted to share with you my thoughts and my experiences with this product. First, let me introduce myself. I work as a staff engineer for a company called KrakenD, and maybe it was formerly known as DACOM, and before that it was known as KropR. I'll get back to that in a minute. So what I wanted to tell you about is, so what is an API gateway and why would you want to use such a product? And next I'll be introducing you to what KrakenD is and what features it offers, and show you a little example, simple configuration to give you an idea of how it works. And finally I'll be sharing with some tips and tricks, some lessons learned I had from my experience, and yeah, showcase what you can do with it and how flexible it is. So just to introduce, commonly if you get started on a new application, it's all really simple. You have an application you build with some web framework like Django, for instance, and you'll have a web client, call some APIs. It's simple enough. And then, of course, the company grows, the application is a success, and you'll create a mobile client that also uses the same endpoints, and maybe it's such a big success that you want to sell it, and you decided you need a subscription system, for instance, and you want to implement it in a separate application, and then you will have to, and then the clients will have to know where the backends are. And then soon enough, you're going to have a third-party API, and the third party needs to know these endpoints, and you have new applications. Maybe you'll have like mergers and acquisitions, and you get new, and you want to renew your application. You build a new version of it, and soon enough you have this whole web of connections. The clients need to find the backends, and the backends will have to talk to one another as well. So you get this kind of stuff, this kind of mess, and then of course the obvious solution here is to introduce something that's called an API gateway. And yeah, this is what happened in our company. So we started out as a simple Django application. We added new applications. We merged with another company which also had their own legacy applications, and then we got acquired by KrakenD, and they also have legacy applications. So in various stages of applications, hosted across multiple cloud providers like Heroku or AWS, or just a hosting bare metal provider. And then you need to, and so it soon became obvious for us that we needed to introduce some API gateway where you have like a single point of entry for all your backend services. So, so what is an API gateway? So as I said, it sits between your clients and your backend application. So it's a portal, and it hides the internal complexity of your backend landscape from your clients, and it's also a great place to introduce some system-wide cross-cutting concerns, and so that you don't have to re-implement them all over your backend services, like authentication and authorization. You can do logging. Load balancing, of course, is something you may need, but also on the level of each endpoint, you can do validation, you can do response, transformation or aggregation, and finally caching, throttling, circuit breaking. That all has to do with, well, so let's call it protecting your backend services from the outside. So you want to to shield them if you have a lot of requests. You would implement it in the API gateway. So we started looking for a solution for that out of the box, so we could build something our own, of course, but yeah, that's not really our core business. There's several cloud or SaaS solutions for this. So AWS has an API gateway. So the downside of that is that you're like the vendor lock-in problem, and as you add more logic to the API gateway, that becomes more and more problematic. And of course, our services are not just in AWS, they're all over the place. So looking around, we found this product called KrakenD. And so KrakenD is an API gateway. It's implemented in Golang. So it's really fast and lightweight to run. And it offers a lot of features right out of the box that you can use without too much work. Like monitoring, security, throttling, circuit breaking. And also you can manipulate your responses and requests. And so what this allows you to do is, and what's an explicit design principle that they want to support, is called back-end for front-end. So you'll have different front ends, so you have mobile apps or client applications or or third-party API. And what you want to do is to offer them an API, a backend that provides exactly the information that the front end use. So not more, not less. And you can like aggregate different backend endpoints into one new endpoint. So this is why what you see on this picture is like an example for that. You have a checkout endpoint, and there's 3 backends for cart, stock, and orders. And so the KrakenD will expose the checkout endpoint and then call these 3 backends and combine the results and pass them back to the client. And since it's like open source, you can add like new middleware, you can change things, and there's also other ways to extend it, like with plugins, and I'm going to show you an example for that later on. So one of the things that they also offer is to showcase what integrations are provided right out of the box is a playground, as they call it. So they have a setup that you can run, and it showcases different way of configuring endpoints and also integrations with an elk stack here, with a pre-configured dashboard even. So you just need to you can load it and it works right out of the box. Integration with things as Jaeger. There's other things. Jaeger is like a tracing application. So if you have like a microservice architecture, you want to add trace IDs to your API calls, and then with the trace you can follow where a request goes across your applications. Grafana dashboard. You can also attach RabbitMQ, so you can create a new endpoint, and KrakenD will put the payload on a queue, or the other way around. It can listen to a queue, and as soon as a new message appears, it can call some backend API. So this also gives you options. So this is a small example configuration. So KrakenD is like a stateless application. So there's no database that you need to maintain. You just need to create a configuration of how your KrakenD should behave. It's in JSON. You can also use YAML, but this is the recommended format. So let me just take you through this. Just to give you an example, so you have like endpoints. So there's a list of endpoints. So in our case, it can be hundreds of endpoints usually if you really use it in production. And the endpoint. So oh, wait a minute. So as an example, this is in one endpoint /git, and then we have like a path parameter defined, and then the endpoint has a field called backend, and there's also an array, so you can have multiple backends for one endpoint. And what it does is then it will call these endpoints in parallel. That's the standard behavior, and then combine those results and send them back in one response. So, for instance, this is calling the GitHub API, and GitHub returns like a lot of details about users. But in this case, we're going to say, okay, we just want these 3 properties in the response. And you can also do like a rename of a property, so block will be named website in the response in this case. And then we have another endpoint, which is just a debug endpoint, which is provided, which you can use to debug your endpoints. It just returns like a static message. So once you create this configuration like this, you can run KrakenD. So they provide Docker images. You can also run the binary, but Docker image is more convenient. So you can run it locally. You can run it on Kubernetes cluster or whatever you want, and just say, okay, we want to use this this configuration, and then if you call this endpoint, you can see the result of the call like this. So another thing that they provide is an online GUI to edit these configurations. So you can load existing configuration, and you have a GUI that where you can edit, and it's a really great way to get to know what features are available and how you should configure things in KrakenD. So you can explore what's on offer. When you seriously start using the KrakenD in production, you probably don't want to use this this GUI anymore, but it's a great way to find out what's going on and to try things out. So you can load them, and you can directly save it back to your disk, and then this is if you run it with a watch suffix image, it will automatically be restarted, and you reload the new configuration. And as you see, some of the things are just enterprise, marked or labeled with enterprise. So it's open source. There's a community version, but there's also an enterprise version. And it may be well worth for your situation that you pay for the extra features. But we got around with the community version. So just what you can do here is, for instance, if we want to add a new endpoint, one of the things you can do is say, okay, we want to have a static response for this endpoint. So let's say hello Pygrunn. And then what it does, if the call fails, so if you don't specify or you have a fake API endpoint there, KrakenD will return this static response. So the use case for this is like documentation of how your responses look like, and also so if you're in a situation where you have different people working on the front end, then you work on the back end. You can use the KrakenD configuration to specify how your endpoint should look, what the responses should look, and right away the front-end developer can start developing his front-end based on the stubs. So I think that's a really cool feature. And then if you save it, it looks like this, extra config, and this is an example of how these extra configurations work. So in this case, it will just have the static is just the stub response, and strategy is incomplete, so you can have different strategies. You want to always include it, or incomplete is one of the backends failing. So you can play around with that. Yeah, this is what this new endpoint will look like. So next thing, as something that you probably want to do if you start using this product in production, is you want to use the flexible configuration. So as we see, as you saw, it's an JSON file, and as you can imagine, as you add more endpoints and more configuration, it can get really, really big, really fast. So that's not what you want. It's not manageable. You want to split it up so you can have like a proper version control and make it more more manageable. So what you can do is you can split up the configuration and then say to KrakenD, okay, it's a flexible configuration. We'll have partials, which are like fragments that are included as is. You can have settings, so you'll have settings for production and development. And those are loaded as variables that you can use in the configuration. And there's templates. So for instance, you could have like different templates for sets of endpoints. That's how we use it. And then we include it all in the flexible template, and there's like a Go templating engine used to build the configuration for that. And then if you start it, you point KrakenD to these directories, and you can also say fc out means, okay, once you have resolved the configuration, just output it to this file, and that's great for inspection of what the result is, or find if you made some typo, you forgot a curly brace or a comma, something like that. So another thing is maintaining the configuration. That's of course a challenge because as you may notice, you're required to create a configuration for each endpoint. So, and if you have a lot of endpoints, that's a lot of work. And as you build your application, most of the endpoints that you create, they are, pretty much what you want them to be at that time. You don't want to have too much manipulation going on there. You basically mostly first want to proxy stuff or work as a proxy. So what I recommend, what I do is, so some applications, if you have a fast API application, for instance, there's an open API JSON specification exposed, and you create a Python script to consume that specification and generate the KrakenD config. From that, as soon as you found out how you want to have things configured generally. And also for Django, you have like a management command called show URLs, and you can also use the output of that to create a script. And this allows you more flexibility, and if you add new endpoints, you just run the script again and they are added. And there's another thing, so and then there's of course the templating thing. So if you have common things that you want to configure, you can put them in a template. And another thing that is very useful, which you can use in, for instance, continuous integration, is a check command from KrakenD, which will check your configuration, because there's like a JSON specification of how it should look like. And there's also an audit command that will give you recommendations of what you should probably add to your configuration to make it more secure. So bot detector or course you can enable. Finally, so what another thing that you probably want to do, or that we thought was a good thing to add, is to expose your whole API in a proper way to document it for the outside world, for developers, but also If you want to have like an external API, we'd want to have like a little Swagger UI for showing what endpoints there are and what kind of responses you can expect. So in order to do this, we can create a plugin, a Golang plugin. There's support for that. This is documented how you should do it, and I was able to quickly develop a plugin that serves static content. So it's just to have it like work as a web server. Of course, there's a lot of web servers out there, but we thought it would be convenient to just deploy it as part of your API gateway. And then the second step will be you can generate OpenAPI JSON specification from the KrakenD configuration. Because it's JSON, this is really easy to consume and process. You add a Swagger bundle and then you can show the documentation. The plugin. So as I mentioned, the KrakenD is built with Golang, and therefore any plugin you want to make, it needs to be programmed in Golang as well. So that's a nice opportunity to learn a new language. It's really cool, and it's pretty short. I've left some things out here, but mostly what you can do is you register. It will be this register handler will be called by KrakenD as you start it up. You can load configuration. I'll show you in a minute how that configuration looks like. And then in this case, this is a plugin that's called for every request. So it is on the server level. You can also create plugins for that. Just work on some specific endpoint or a backend. But this is for every call. And what you see here is, okay, I'll check if the request path starts with a prefix, so say /doc, or if it doesn't start with it, I'm going to just chain it, just do serve HTTP. We'll just continue, and otherwise we're going to find the resource that's being requested, and we open that from the path that we configured. And if it's so Golang requires you to always take into account that something can go wrong, and then you need to handle it. So maybe it's not existing. Otherwise, you'll get a panic, as it's called in Golang. And basically copy the content of that file to the output, and that's it. And you have like a little static server plugin created for KrakenD. So you'll there's like a builder image available from KrakenD that you can use to build it, because the plugin needs to use the exact same libraries from Go as as KrakenD itself. So you need to check that this is exactly the same. So for that they have like a compiler available, and there's also the check plugin command that checks if everything is okay, and if it's not, it tells you what to do, how to fix it. And then you can configure it. You can say, okay, this is the plugins are in this folder, and this is what the configuration looks like. Okay, I'm going to say a static server plugin will be loaded, and so this is the configuration that I want to inject into my newly created plugin. So next step is generate your specification. So OpenAPI is, maybe most of you are familiar with it. If not, it's you probably heard of Swagger, and Swagger was the initiator, I think, of the standard of documenting APIs. So describing what endpoints there are, and what parameters are allowed, and how the entity should look like. So and since the configuration is also JSON, it's really easy to consume. You can get like these endpoints. You can get the comments. So if something you can put into configuration a field starting with an @ and it will be ignored. So this is an opportunity to add like some extra metadata that you want to add to the documentation. So a description. Also, yeah, so the stub, you can include that as an example. And find the path parameters here. So I'm going to add that to the JSON and then write it out. Yeah, you can download or you can use CDN actually to get the Swagger bundle. And then if you restart the, or if you start the KrakenD, KrakenD will be able to serve like a proper Swagger interface, exposing all your endpoints and describing that the way it is. So it's also a great way for you to, yeah, keep a check on what's actually you have been configuring and how what's going on. So in conclusion, yeah, I found it a really great tool to manage your API. So it wasn't like an answer to all the requirements that we had. It really solved the problem for us. It's a really lightweight and fast, which is important requirement, of course, for an API gateway. It's really simple to configure, so they have a lot of documentation, a lot of tooling to make that easy for you. I think it's really concise. You get lots of stuff out of the box, so you don't need to figure out how to set up an Elk stack or to integrate it with Jaeger or whatever. It's versatile and extensible. So I showed you the plugin. That's one thing. You can also add like Lua scripts, and there's other stuff that you can do to manipulate how the responses or requests look like. And yeah, most of all, it makes your software architecture much more agile. So once you have an API gateway in place, you have much more freedom to change the implementation you use on the back end. And to transition from one backend to another, for instance, and all while providing like a uniform interface for your clients. Yeah, so cons is, of course, you need to maintain it. Then instead of if you build an endpoint, you also need to create like a configuration for it to expose it. And yeah, you need to restart the API gateway for changes to have any effect. But well, we actually deploy it on Kubernetes, so that's not really an issue because Kubernetes takes care of that stuff. Yeah, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for your attention.